And I now invite Vishakha ji, Khetrapal, and Smriti ji Rekha, uh, who will be presenting on neurocognitive benefits of traditional Indian stories, a conceptual understanding. Vishakha ji, she's an independent consultant, social sciences researcher, writer, educationist, and a former manufacturing engineer. A multifaceted personality, has many interests, including sustainability, creative writing, and indigenous knowledge systems of India. Uh, she has run an experiential tourism project engaged with tribal artisans in Madhya Pradesh. She was a former UNESCO Sahapedia Research Fellow, as well a Kathak learner. She has a passion for teaching and continuously engages with various organizations working on holistic development of youth and children. She's also an active volunteer at Anadi Foundation, which is where Smriti Rekha ji comes from. She is a co-founder of Anadi Foundation, and also Dharma Gurukulam. She's co-founded Anadi for Lokasangraha and designs various programs and initiatives that blend ancient Indian wisdom and modern science and technology, which is very much the need of the hour. A practitioner of yoga, a modern day storyteller, she devotes her time in sadhana and organizational management and swadhyaya. 10 plus years of very rich academic and teaching experience. And if my memory serves right, she's in the past too presented, and I've read a lot of stuff that she has written. I now welcome Vishakha ji and Smriti ji for your presentation, please.
Thank you, Shivakumar ji, for this introduction. And I'm extremely honored to be a part of this conference with in the company of such esteemed panelists, curators, and the audience. I'm grateful to also my co-author, Srimati Smriti Rekha ji, who has been a constant source of inspiration in this body of work that I'm going to present. I'll just share my screen now. So this is the brief overview of the presentation. We will first discuss the various storytelling forms in India, and then I will move on to the crux of the presentation, which is the neurocognitive benefits of stories, and we would discuss the various benefits in detail. And then we would look at the scope for future research, because this particular area promises and opens up opportunities for great research, both in experimental and theoretical areas. Next slide. So as we've already established through the various speaker sessions today, that India has various storytelling forms which are as diverse as our languages and cultures are. In fact, storytelling is something which cultures across the world share in common. We have various storytelling traditions. Next. So here we're trying to look at some of the storytelling forms which are popular in India. The first one being musical stories. So music is at the heart of our storytelling traditions. If we look at the Itihasa, which comprises of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, they are also composed in the form of a poetry. They've been written in a meter known as the Anushtup Chandas. Now, this lyrical style of these stories make them easy to comprehend and to be passed on to our future generations. And we've had, and there are traditions of kathas and kirtanas, which also represent this musical storytelling tradition of India. Of course, there are folk traditions like the picture you can see on screen is of Tijan Bai, who is a very popular Pandwani singer, where the stories of Pandavas from Mahabharata are narrated to the listeners with the help of singing and using a musical instrument called tambura. And similarly, other musical traditions as well. When we talk of music, it's incomplete without talking about dance. And Indian dance form again have been excellent instruments for storytelling. For instance, the Indian dance form of Kathak derives its name from the word Katha, which means story, and the dancers were known as kathakars, or the storytellers. And I am blessed to have got an opportunity to learn Kathak myself. The dancers in Kathak are depicting the stories in the form of through their hand movements, through the footwork and the facial gestures. And these are typically stories from our Itihasa Purana, which have been adopted into various dance pieces. And it's common across both classical dance forms like Kathak or Kathakali, or the Krishna Ras Leela from Manipur, or the folk dance traditions like Ghumar from Rajasthan, so on and so forth. Next slide. Now, while dance and music form more of a dynamic forms of storytelling, there are also static forms of storytelling through our sculptures and paintings. Now, stone architecture has been a very popular form of storytelling from time immemorial, and our temples have had a rich tradition of intricate carvings where the scenes from various epics or the entire stories were depicted. For instance, the picture that you see on the screen is from the Amruteshwara temple. It is in the Chikmagalur district of Karnataka. And this particular scene is the scene where Krishna is lifting the Govardhana Parvat. So similarly, there have been wall painting, cave paintings from the ancient times where stories were told through these graphical medium. Now, there are also modern day storytelling, which makes use of excellent technological tools blended with the stories from the past. For instance, at Anadi Foundation, with which we are associated, we make use of software tools like Stellarium or Astro UNL to demonstrate the astronomical principles discussed in the Mahabharata through a visual tool. Next. Next slide. So now, after looking at various storytelling forms, what the interesting question that came up was what is the impact of stories on our brains? Of course, we all enjoy listening to stories, but what happens inside our brains when we listen to them? So there was an experiment done by Haider and Simmel in the year 1944, in which a group of students, college students, were shown a short film. The short film was a simple animation with with two triangles and a circle moving around. In the interest of time, I'm not able to show you that clipping. But the interesting revelation out of the study was that almost all of the students interpreted the movement of those geometrical figures on the screen in the form of a story or a narrative. For instance, one of the students imagined that the two triangles that were moving were men who were fighting for the woman who was the circle, and the circle was worried, so she was moving around. This is a very interesting concept, and it's known as pareidolia, which is the imagined perception of a pattern where it actually does not exist. So this kinds of establishes how our brains are tended or have a tendency to construct stories. Next. Now, what happens when we listen to stories? So when we listen to bullet points, like in this, probably in this presentation, two areas of our brain are activated, which is the Broca area and the Wernicke area. In simple terms, these are areas which help to translate the words into meaning. But a well-told story can activate many other centers of the brain, including the experiential centers. For instance, there was a research which was done at the University of Cambridge, where it was seen that mention of words related to food would trigger the sensory areas of the brain, or the description of movement with words like jump or ran would activate the motor cortex, which is the area of the brain responsible for movement. So stories help us actually go through the experience of the characters, and the transmission of knowledge becomes so much more easier when illustrated in the form of a story. Next slide, please. Next. So now we would look at, we move into the second section where we would look at some of these neurocognitive benefits in detail. The first one being improvement in cognition. Here we would look at two parameters, memory and learning. So we've all seen through our experiences that our human memory works better in context. We've all when while preparing for exams, sometimes created stories in our head to understand a concept. These stories aid in building linked memory, which help us in the in the better retrieval of the information. So, in fact, I would like to quote a research here, which was done at the Stanford University, where there were two groups of participants. One group was given a set of words to memorize. The another group was given the same words but interspersed in a story. Now, because this is a storytelling conference, you would predict that the second group, which was given the words to memorize in the form of a story, performed better. But like all great stories, there's a twist here as well. So both the groups performed equally well in the short term, as in when they were tested immediately after giving them the set of words. But then when they were tested after some time, the storytelling group performed better. So they had a 93% recall versus the control group, which had only 13% recall. This shows that storytelling helps in building what is called as the episodic memory or the long-term memory. Now the Itihasa Purana, because it is our Itihasa and Purana is blended with rasa and with the emotions, it helps in building this episodic or the long-term memory. Story also helps in vicarious learning, which is our ability to learn from the experience of others. So when we listen to a story, we construct mental models based on that story, and it helps us learning. So if one wants, it becomes so that's why kids are introduced to moral stories, where they are able to understand a complex concept in terms of that story, and hence are able to adopt that in their lives in a better way. Next slide. So this is just an illustration that storytelling activates both the sides of the brain, not just the language centers, but also the artistic side of the brain. Next slide. Now talking about the second aspect is the development of multiple skills. So when we listen to stories, when we read stories or listen to stories, there are several other areas of knowledge that we are exposed to, be it language or grammar, and also various other concepts which are otherwise difficult to understand. So I'll give you an example from Itihasa Purana. So to be able to read the original Purana text, one needs the support of Vedangas, which are phonetics, meter, or the knowledge of astronomy. So these knowledge systems come in automatically as part of learning of reading or listening to a story. So it helps us to learn in this context. And stories introduced in classrooms can aid in better retention and understanding of these concepts in students. Next. Now, when we talk of cognition, another aspect that comes in is of social emotional learning. So stories have been demonstrated to be a great tool for social emotional learning, be it the development of empathy. So it is said that when we listen to stories with great characters, the oxytocin hormone, which is also known as the moral hormone, is secreted. Now, this is important because this hormone helps us to empathize with the characters or to generate kindness in us. We are able to put ourselves into others' shoes and think from their perspective. Now, this hormone is very important because it can actually lead to virtuous behavior in the listener just by the experience of listening to that story. Another very important aspect is learning through neural coupling. So it was observed by a research at Princeton University that when a storyteller is narrating the story, the brainwave patterns of the storyteller is imitated by the listener. So these are called as mirror neurons, and they help in much easier transmission and retention of the knowledge into the minds of the listener. And it's a great tool for transfer of knowledge. Next. Another aspect is the transformation of belief. So when we listen to stories, or when we read stories, areas in those particular areas in the brain are activated, which predict, which help us predict the other's motives. So now stories help us to think of situations from a different viewpoint than from our own, than what is there in our own belief system. So it helps us understand different worldviews. So stories can not only be a tool for understanding different worldviews, but it can lead to an overall harmony among people or groups or societies. It also helps us to think in context. We are able to bring different contexts. It is also an excellent tool for transfer of rules and maxims set up in a society, and passing on those rules and maxims across generations. Next. Now, this is a very interesting aspect of story, which is particularly important to Indian traditional stories. The non-anthropocentric view, where humans do not form the center of the world, and humans, we see other creatures also as equal to us. For instance, we have stories of Ma Ganga, which is a river, but we see her as mother and goddess. So these stories in turn help us in developing a better understanding of the environment. Next slide. Now, emotional well-being stories also help in social bonding. So in Indian context, grandparents are the one who would recite stories to children, and thus help in building transmission of values, and also bonding amongst two generations. And also stories can help in building self-esteem. So there was a research where it was shown that we kind of build a relationship with the characters, which is termed as parasocial relationship, and which in turn makes us feel less lonely, and also helps in improving self-esteem in children. Stories can also be an excellent mode of trauma healing. Stories, certain clinical researchers have proven that young children recuperate better from physical and mental illness when they are exposed to various stories during their healing. In fact, from my personal experience, so I belong to a family of migrants. Our grandparents migrated from what is now Pakistan, and the stories helped us. The stories which our grandparents narrated to us helped us connect to our ancient past, and also it was a medium for for healing the collective trauma that the community had experienced during that process. Stories can also be an excellent tool for inculcating values. Taking example of different stories from Mahabharata and Ramayana, different concepts of dharma or purushartha framework can be transmitted. Next. Now, why does a neurocognitive lens come of importance? So, of course, the Itihasa Purana mentions the benefit of listening to them in the form of falashrutis, but a modern scientific view can help us reach out to the contemporary audiences and learners, and also establish these neurocognitive benefits. Here, what we are trying to do is to create a pave the path for future research, which can also involve experience, where experiments can be done, and thus these stories could also be included in our educational curriculums as need be. Next slide. I would now like to talk about the future research possibilities in this area. Next slide, please. So as I said, it opens up tremendous research possibilities. It is just the beginning that we've tried to see it through a neurocognitive lens. certain research areas that we propose are studying impact of traditional stories on emotional well-being of listeners, where we actually measure brain responses through neurotransmitters, or studying regions of brain that show enhanced neural activity with blended story telling. Of course, there have been studies on brain across the world, but they have mostly been on so there is no specific study that has happened on traditional Indian stories, and we propose this as part of this paper. And also how traditional stories can help in treating neurodevelopment disorders in children like autism or fear responses. So these are the areas of study. These are some of the references. And I thank you everyone for patient listening and apologize for the communication here.
Dhanyavad, Vishakha ji and Smriti ji. Uh, I think as you put in the last slide, there is significant scope of research over here, especially in the way, in the forms of storytelling. And on the one hand is the impact on the psyche, the individual, but on the other hand, what is the impact on the formation and the evolution of communities. So that is one thing. That is, India has been an extraordinary community civilization, and I think stories have played a very important role so in shaping both the individual and the community.